Hi, like Michael, I also have some personal poignant moments in this room. For me, it was about just 50 years ago that I was on what used to be a big stage right here, doing plays with the Saturday afternoon activities. So it's really special to be back in this room again and get to speak to all of you about my book and my journey. So when I was young, I thought there was a preconceived roadmap for my life. Going to college, check. Getting married, check. Having babies, check and check. Moving into my dream house, check. And living happily ever after, check, check, check. That's how the story is supposed to go. Those are the landmarks we're supposed to set our sights on as we travel down the road, moving right along from one to the next. I was well on my way to my happily ever after, but I wasn't expecting the detours, the construction ahead, the unexpected places I'd end up when I veered off the path that society said I should be traveling. Resilience, what does that word mean? Well, if you Google it, you'll find two definitions. The first is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. The second is the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. To be resilient, you either have to be tough, able to keep your shape no matter what comes your way, or you have to be flexible, able to bend and change to fit the new space in which you find yourself. Or you have to be both. What I found out through my journey off the path I thought I was supposed to travel was that there was a part of me that was tough and a part of me that could withstand whatever trials and struggles came my way. That part of me remained no matter what else changed. The same core had been there since childhood. Sometimes it had been hidden, sometimes it had been ignored or neglected, but it's always been there. But I also learned how to be flexible. I learned how to bend and change my expectations and my ideas about how others viewed me, but more importantly, about how I viewed myself. I changed through those struggles. Resilience takes knowing what parts of yourself you can change without losing who you are. Resilience means letting go of the expectations of others and living up to your own. But first, I had to figure out who I really was, outside of who I had become to play the roles in my life. Wife, mother, daughter, business owner. Where were the parts of me I was before I had those roles? Who is my authentic self now? What are my true qualities, values, and expectations? I ask almost every client I have to write a list of those as homework, and they're often surprised by how difficult that task is. There was a time when I thought I had it all figured out. Even when the shiny surface of my perfect life started to show some cracks, I ignored them. Instead, I pushed and I pushed and I pushed to the next landmark. I kept going until I simply couldn't go anymore. Then I found myself paralyzed from the neck down. I had Guillain-Barré syndrome. I was intubated in a hospital bed, trapped with only the hum of the machine that was breathing for me and my own thoughts. To my surprise, in those days of forced reflection, it wasn't my list of achievements that I focused on. It was the disconnect between how I was living and how I wanted to live that stood out so forcefully. Things have to change were the first words I rasped out to my husband after they took the tube from my throat. Over the years, I would tell people about the things I had been through, recovering from being suddenly paralyzed with 2 young children, divorce, single parenthood, a newfound love for home building just before the market tanked, which then led into a bankruptcy, a broken back, breast cancer, and the effort to start over and over again and again and again. They would always tell me, you should write a book. And I'd just laugh, because who would want to read a book about me? What do I have to say that's worth hearing? Sure, my stories are crazier than most, and I have more than many. But in my years of being a licensed professional counselor and authenticity coach, I found myself returning to the lessons, coping skills, and strategies I learned from each of my stories again and again. I was sharing them with clients not because I had all the answers, but because I knew that what I had learned through my journey could help guide them through their journey. Sure, the details of my stories are unique, but the most common thing I hear from people who have read my book is that they see themselves in my stories. I'll share a quick story with you. A couple of weeks ago, I heard from a book reviewer who had read the book and was about to write a review for it. And she emailed me to tell me that she saw so much of her life in my stories. Her father had had sarcoidosis, which was a disease I had earlier. It's in there. But she also had an older aunt, and her aunt was very ill for many years, and she said that she felt badly because she felt like she probably wasn't there for her aunt enough, her family probably didn't notice their symptoms early enough, and that healthcare in India is horrible, so she's not getting the health care she needs. And I messaged her back and I said it seemed like she was carrying a lot of guilt about her aunt's illness and that I'd be happy to speak to her aunt anytime because her aunt's illness has her incapacitated much like I was when I had Guillain-Barré. So I got an email back from her saying she had never realized, it had never occurred to her she was carrying any guilt about her aunt's illness, so that was a light bulb, and that she had shared my information with her aunt. So to cut to the chase, the next day I heard from her aunt, and I've been communicating with both of them on a regular basis. So here we have a story with one person in India, one person in Canada, and me in St. Louis. And my book, my stories, that's what has connected us all. Connections like this, being able to touch and help people, is what in the long run takes everything I've been through and allows me to see it as a gift instead of a long list of traumas. So many of us find ourselves walking along a path just because it's the one we think we're supposed to be on. So many of us find ourselves going through the motions of life without questioning how we got there or if it's what we really want. And none of us go through life unscathed. We all face difficult challenges at one time or another: divorce, careers ending, losing a loved one, or a health crisis. When you aren't sure of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, resilience can be really hard to find. When you get knocked down, you have to figure out which parts of you are indispensable and which ones you can adapt. If you don't know who your authentic self is, it can be extremely difficult to stand back up. But when you get to the place of radical self-acceptance, and please note, I said self-acceptance, not self-love, because if I ask all of you in this room, does love everything about yourself, I'm setting almost every one of you up for failure. So let's see if we can all just get to a place of self-acceptance, knowing and liking what makes you tick, what you're passionate about, your core values and qualities. That knowledge, that gives you a kind of superpower. You're no longer defined by a marriage that doesn't fulfill you or a job that you don't enjoy. No longer is your self-worth determined by a number you see on the scale or the hours you build that week. Knowing who you are gives you the power to take risks, ignore critics, and the inner voice that tries to hold you to a standard that you aren't even trying to meet. My story is one of finding out that my checklist to happily ever after didn't match who I really was. And that realization, as painful as it was in the moment, opened the door to living a life that is so much freer and so much more authentic to who I really am. That's what I ultimately wrote about in Resilience Road, Exploring Your Authentic Life Path. Change can be very scary, and the work to make it happen can be hard, but when you find out what you're really made of, you realize you can take the punches life throws at you. You know you have what it takes to fall down and get back up, confident that the best authentic you is still there. Thank you.
Our next author is Jo Regenbogen.